Rain hit the windows of the Voss estate like it had a personal grudge. Elara heard them before she saw them. The crunch of gravel under heavy tires, the low rumble of engines cutting through the storm, the kind of silence that follows when men who don't need to speak to each other step out of vehicles and move with purpose. She was standing in the kitchen, still in her work clothes, a half-eaten sandwich on the counter she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Her uncle Gregor was somewhere behind her, pacing the hallway, the way he'd been pacing it for 3 days, back and forth, wearing a groove into the floorboards and into her patience. "They're here," he said. His voice came out flat. Not scared. Past scared. Elara set down her glass. She didn't run to the window. She walked. Because running would mean she'd already lost something, and she wasn't ready to decide that yet. Through the rain-blurred glass, she counted 4 black SUVs. 12 men at least, though some stayed near the vehicles. And then, moving through the downpour without an umbrella, without hurrying, without giving a single second's notice to the rain soaking his dark coat, a man she had never met but somehow recognized anyway. Not from a photograph. From the way everyone around him contracted slightly, the way a room changes temperature when something dangerous enters it. Damien Cross walked toward the front door of the estate her family had owned for 40 years, like he was already deciding what to do with it. Before we go any further, if you've ever had someone take something from you that was never theirs to take, this story is going to hit close. Stay with me until the end. And if you're watching from wherever you are in the world, drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button if you're already feeling something, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because this is only the beginning. Gregor Voss had a gift for catastrophe. Elara had known this her entire life, had watched him charm his way out of bad situations with a smile and a handshake, then walk directly into worse ones. He was her mother's brother, which meant he was the only family she had left after the accident 6 years ago took her parents on a wet highway outside the city. He was warm and funny and completely incapable of telling himself no. In other words, he was the kind of man you loved and protected even when you were exhausted from doing it. The debt he'd accumulated, the full number of which she hadn't known until 72 hours ago, was $340,000. He'd borrowed from loan sharks, private lenders, underground card games, stacked one bad bet on top of another for 2 years, and then the whole structure had shifted and every single debt had been purchased, consolidated, transferred to one man, Damien Cross. She'd looked him up the moment Gregor finally broke down and told her. What she found wasn't comforting. Damien Cross ran the most stable criminal organization on the eastern seaboard, stable being a relative term that mostly meant nobody challenged him twice. He'd taken over from his father at 26 after a boardroom-style coup that left 3 lieutenants reassigned and 1 in a coma. He was 34 now. The rumors about him were the kind that got repeated carefully, in low voices, by people who understood that some names carry weight even when the person isn't in the room. She'd closed the browser tab and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The knock at the door, if you could call it that, the heavy impact of a fist that wasn't asking, came just before 9. Elara answered it herself because Gregor had gone pale and was holding the wall near the kitchen doorway. She opened the door and looked at Damien Cross from a distance of about 4 feet. He was taller than she'd expected. Dark eyes, no warmth in them. Not cold exactly, more like the warmth had been packed away somewhere for safekeeping, and he hadn't decided yet whether to take it back out. He looked at her the way you look at an architectural problem, like he was calculating load-bearing walls. "You're not Gregor Voss," he said. "No," she said. "I'm his niece, Elara." He studied her for a moment. One of his men, broad-shouldered, wearing an earpiece, shifted slightly behind him. Damien didn't shift. He was the kind of man who didn't need to adjust his position to feel secure in it. "Is he here?" "He is." "Then I'd like to come in." It wasn't a question. She stepped back anyway because arguing about the threshold. When 12 men were standing in your driveway in the rain felt like a waste of energy she was going to need for what came next. The living room of the Voss estate was large and drafty and filled with furniture that had been expensive once. Gregor appeared from the hallway, and the change in him when he saw Damien was immediate. His shoulders dropped, his jaw tightened, and he looked for a half-second like a man watching a verdict being read. "Mr. Cross," Gregor said. Damien didn't answer right away. He looked around the room with the same architectural patience he'd applied to Elara, and then he sat down in the armchair near the fireplace like he'd been invited to. Nobody had invited him. 340,000, Damien said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Plus interest, processing fees, and the cost of my time, which I value. You've had 90 days since I acquired the paper on your loans. You haven't made contact. You haven't made a payment. You haven't sent anyone to explain the situation. Gregor's hands opened and closed at his sides. I know. I'm working on it. You're not, Damien said. Not unkind, just accurate. Working on it would have produced something by now. What you've been doing is hoping I'd forget, or that something would appear, or that some version of events would develop in which you didn't owe me money. None of those things happened. The fireplace crackled. Rain hit the windows. Elara stood near the doorway and said nothing, because she was listening and she was watching, and the space between Damien's words felt like something she needed to understand. I'm prepared to sign over the estate, Gregor said. His voice cracked slightly on it. It was appraised at 280. I know it doesn't cover... I don't want the estate, Damien said. The room stopped. Gregor blinked. Elara's chest tightened in a way she didn't like, a way that meant her instincts were trying to tell her something before her brain caught up. Then, what? Damien looked at Elara, just looked at her, steady and deliberate, like he was confirming something he'd already decided. The debt is forgiven, he said, if your niece agrees to marry me. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Gregor made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Elara's breath went out of her slowly. She was aware of every small sound in the room, the fire, the rain, the faint creak of the house settling, someone outside shifting their weight on the porch. You can't, Gregor started. I'm not speaking to you right now, Damien said. He hadn't moved. He was still looking at Elara with that same flat, measuring steadiness. I'm speaking to her. Elara had a very specific internal reaction to being told what to do, which was that the part of her that complied went quiet, and the part of her that didn't went very, very loud. She crossed her arms, not defensively, more like she was keeping herself organized. Why? She said. The question seemed to interest him slightly. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement that a smile might exist somewhere in the vicinity. Because I need a wife. That's not a reason. That's a condition. A pause. He studied her. You're right. It's a condition. I said I'd tell you the reason once you've agreed. That's not how agreements work. It's how this one works. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she'd trained herself to look at problems when she was figuring out whether they were solvable. She was an architectural designer by trade, which meant she spent her days evaluating structures for hidden weakness, for cracks that only showed under load. Damien Cross showed none, which either meant he didn't have any, or they were somewhere she couldn't see yet. Both possibilities made her uncomfortable. If I say no, she said. Gregor made a small, agonized sound from across the room. Then your uncle and I go back to our previous arrangement, Damien said, which ends with him losing everything, including this house, and more than likely facing criminal exposure for 2 of the loans he took that weren't from licensed entities. You'd ruin him. I'd collect what I'm owed. Whether that ruins him is his own accounting. She hated that he was right about that. She hated it in the specific way you hate something that's accurate and uncomfortable at the same time. She turned and looked at Gregor. Really looked at him. This man who had picked her up from school when her parents were in the ground, who had made her terrible pancakes every Sunday for a year because he thought it would help, who had also apparently set fire to their lives through 2 years of bad choices, and then said nothing until the fire reached her door. She loved him. She was also furious with him. Both things were completely true. When she turned back to Damien Cross, something had shifted behind his expression. Not warmth, exactly. More like recognition. Like he'd watched her process the same calculation he'd already run and arrive at the same answer. How long? She said. A year, he said. Minimum. After that, we discuss. I want the terms in writing. You'll have them. I want a lawyer to review them, not one of yours. Something moved in his eyes, a quick thing, gone before she could name it. Agreed. And I want to know the real reason. Not now, but I want to know it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you'll know it before the ink dries. Elara nodded once. The motion was small and controlled and cost her more than she let anyone in that room see. Then I'll hear your proposal, she said. The documents arrived at the house the next morning, delivered by a woman named Iris, who had the manner of someone who had worked for Damien Cross for a long time and had learned to carry no expression that could be read as opinion. The package included a formal contract, a non-disclosure agreement, and a letter that turned out to be from a neutral legal firm in the city, confirming that Elara was entitled to her own independent legal counsel, and that such counsel had been arranged and paid for by Mr. Cross at a firm with no previous affiliation to his business dealings. The lawyer's name was Helen Park. She was in her mid-50s, sharp and economical with her words. She called Elara at 8 in the morning. "Have you read the contract?" Helen asked. "Yes." "What's your read on it?" "It's oddly fair," Elara said. "That makes me more nervous, not less." A pause on the line. "That's a sensible response. The terms for your living situation are clear. You'll reside at the Cross property, but will have private quarters, a personal security detail of your choosing within a set list, access to your existing employment, and a financial stipend that is, frankly, excessive." "I know." "The marriage can be dissolved after 12 months at your request or at mutual agreement. There are no penalties on your side for dissolution. There is a clause requiring you not to speak publicly about the nature of the arrangement during the marriage itself." "The golden cage clause," Elara said. "Reasonably constructed as golden cages go," Helen said. "I've seen far worse in legitimate corporate marriages. Do you want me to push back on anything?" Elara thought about this. "The reason," she said. "There's nothing in here about why. He said I'd know before I signed. I want that in writing too." Helen was quiet for a moment. "I'll request it." The addendum came back within the hour. It was a single paragraph, and it said, in measured legal language, that Damien Cross required a wife in order to fulfill a condition in his late father's estate, a clause specifying that a significant portion of his father's private holdings, separate from the business, would only transfer to Damien in full upon his marriage before the age of 35. The deadline was 9 months away. She read it twice. Then she called Helen back. "It's an inheritance clause," Elara said. "It appears so. He's not collecting a debt. He's using the debt as a mechanism to find someone willing to sign quickly." "That would be my assessment, yes." "Why me, though?" Helen's pause had a texture to it, like she was deciding how much to say. "I did some research this morning. Your name appears in a property filing from 3 years ago. You co-signed a development proposal for a commercial building in the east quarter of the city. That proposal was rejected, but the firm that submitted it, Crestline Design, was subsequently acquired by a subsidiary of Cross Holdings." Elara went very still. "He knew who I was," she said. "There's no direct evidence of that," Helen said carefully. "No," Elara said. "But there's enough." She sat with that for the rest of the day. Not with anger. The anger was there, but she'd learned a long time ago that anger without information was just noise. What she sat with was the specific awareness that she was not a random woman her uncle's debt had happened to land her in front of. She had been found. She had been chosen. And someone had gone to the trouble of constructing a situation in which she would feel she had no choice. The question she couldn't answer yet was whether Damien had done that himself, or whether someone else had done it for him. She signed the papers on a Thursday. The ceremony was quiet to the point of being almost private. A judge, 2 witnesses from Damien's staff, Helen Park in the back row, with the expression of someone prepared to document everything. Gregor had asked to come, and Elara had told him no. Not cruelly, just clearly. She didn't want to stand at the front of that room and feel his relief at the same time she was feeling whatever she was feeling, which was a complicated knot of determination and cold fear, and something she refused to name yet. Damien stood beside her in a dark suit and said the words when he was supposed to say them, and signed where he was supposed to sign. His handwriting was precise and controlled. Of course it was. Afterward, in the car, one of the black SUVs, because of course, he turned to look at her and said, "The transfer will be complete in 8 months. I'll hold to every condition in the contract." "I know you will," she said. Not because she trusted him, because the contract was specific enough that breaking it would cost him more than honoring it. Is there anything you need before we arrive at the property? She looked out the window at the city going past. Rain, again. Bellevere was always raining in October. Tell me about your father, she said. She felt rather than saw the slight change in him beside her. The almost imperceptible tightening that a person does when something lands closer than expected. Elara, Damien said in a tone she couldn't quite read. You know why I agreed, she said. I'd like to know why you really needed it to be me. The car moved through wet streets. The silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly, more like a room where two people have just put down their weapons and are deciding what comes next. Your uncle's debt, he said finally, was purchased on my behalf by someone else, someone who wanted to create the circumstances that would bring you into my house. She turned to look at him. His jaw was set, and his eyes were on the road ahead, and for the first time she saw something behind the control. Not weakness. Something older than that. A man who had learned to make every decision a calculation because somewhere along the way, feeling things fully had cost him too much. Someone on your staff, she said. Yes. And you let it happen anyway. His jaw tightened. I had my own reasons for needing a wife quickly. Their agenda and mine lined up. I chose to proceed. But you don't know yet whether I'm the danger or the answer. He looked at her then. Actually looked at her. And there was something in it that wasn't calculation. Something that surprised even him, maybe. No, Damien Cross said quietly. I don't. The rain kept falling. The car kept moving. Elara pressed her back against the seat and looked at the city she'd lived in her whole life going past the window, and understood, with a clarity that settled into her bones, that whatever she'd walked into, she was not going to survive it by being passive. She'd learned the bones of a building by studying the places where it was most likely to break. She was going to apply the same method to Damien Cross. Starting tonight. The Cross estate sat 12 miles outside Bellevere's city limits, which Elara decided was either a security measure or a statement of intent, probably both. The house was enormous in the way that old money makes things enormous. Not flashy, not decorated for impression, but built with the kind of permanence that tells you the people who commissioned it expected to outlast everything around them. Stone walls, high ceilings, windows that were taller than she was. A staff of 6 who moved through the rooms with the practiced invisibility of people who understood that their job was to exist without being noticed. Iris, the same woman who had delivered the contracts, showed Elara to her quarters on the East Wing's 2nd floor. 2 rooms, a sitting area, a bedroom, a bathroom with heated floors that Elara noticed and refused to be comforted by. There was a door between her rooms and Damien's that had a lock on her side. She checked it twice. Dinner is at 7, Iris said from the doorway. Mr. Cross eats in the main dining room unless he's working. He usually isn't at 7. Does he expect me there? Iris's expression didn't change. He didn't say, but the table is set for 2. Elara unpacked the single bag she'd brought. She wasn't moving her whole life in here, not yet, maybe not ever, and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the ceiling. The plasterwork was original, probably 1920s. She could see a hairline crack running from the east corner toward the center, the kind of settling damage that happens slowly over decades and gets ignored until it doesn't. She was at dinner at 7. Whooped up. Damien was already seated when she came in, reading something on his phone with the focused disinterest of a man who had taught himself to use waiting productively. He put the phone face down when she sat. She noted that. People who put their phones face down were either being polite or hiding something, and she'd need more time to figure out which one this was. You found it, he said. It's a big house. Not that complicated. Some people find the layout disorienting. I'm an architectural designer, she said. I read floor plans the way other people read faces. He looked at her. And what does this one tell you? She poured water from the carafe on the table, taking her time with it. That whoever built it valued control over comfort. Every room in this wing is positioned so that you can see the approaches from at least 2 angles. The guest quarters are isolated enough that sound doesn't carry to the main rooms. And the staff entrance is on the opposite side of the building from the family rooms, which tells me whoever designed this wanted to make sure no one in service position could hear a private conversation. Damien was quiet for a moment. My grandfather built it, he said, in 1931. He was a cautious man. He lived to 89. In his business, that was a form of success. Food arrived, brought by a staff member who set everything down and withdrew in under 45 seconds. The food was good. She ate, and he ate. And the silence between them wasn't hostile exactly. It had the quality of two people inside a small room who had agreed not to touch the walls yet. Victor Hale will be here tomorrow morning, Damien said. She'd seen the name in her research. His chief advisor, the man who ran the administrative and strategic side of Cross Holdings, who had been with Damien's father before Damien took over. Is he aware of the arrangement? He arranged it, Damien said. And then he watched her. She kept her face even. You told me someone on your staff purchased my uncle's debt in order to bring me here. That was him. Yes. And you kept him. He's useful. That's one word for a man who manipulates your personal life without being asked. Damien's hand moved slightly on the table, a small, controlled motion that might have been the beginning of something he decided not to finish. Victor identified a solution to a problem I had. He executed it without telling me until it was done. I was angry, and then I decided to use it. But you don't trust him anymore. I never fully trusted him. Then why is he still here? Because the devil, you know, Damien said, is a management strategy. Elara leaned back slightly. She was thinking about load-bearing structures again, about which walls were decorative and which ones, if removed, would bring down the ceiling. What does he want? She asked. Victor, from having me here. Damien looked at her steadily. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Victor Hale arrived at 9 the following morning, and Elara disliked him from across the foyer. He was in his 60s, compact and neat, in the way of men who have always been underestimated and learned to weaponize it. Silver hair, a careful handshake, eyes that moved across Elara's face with the efficiency of a scanner. He smiled. The smile reached exactly far enough to be read as warm. Mrs. Cross, he said, welcome to the family. The word family landed wrong. She couldn't have explained exactly how, just that it did. Like a key that fits the lock but sticks slightly on the way out. Mr. Hale, she said. He turned to Damien without a transition, sliding into business the way water moves around an obstacle. The Renner meeting is confirmed for Thursday. They're bringing 2 people we haven't dealt with before. I've had background pulled. I'll have it on your desk by noon. And the portside situation needs your sign-off before end of week. Damien nodded once. He was watching Victor the way you watch a road in bad weather. Not with fear, but with the concentrated attention of someone who knows the conditions are unreliable. Elara will be present for Thursday's meeting, Damien said. Victor's smile didn't drop. It simply recalibrated. Of course, though the Renner group may find the dynamic, she'll be present, Damien repeated. Flat, no negotiation in it. A pause. Victor looked at Elara and the smile came back, warmer this time, which made her trust it less. Absolutely. It'll be good for them to see the family structure. She smiled back at him with the same practiced warmth and said nothing, because she understood now that the space between his words was where the real information lived. The first real fight happened 2 days in, and it wasn't with Damien. Elara had set up a workspace in the sitting room. She'd taken a remote consulting contract from her firm, something she'd negotiated into the contract terms, her continued employment being non-negotiable. She was working through structural drawings on her laptop when one of the younger staff members, a man named Cord, who handled security rotations, appeared in the doorway and told her that her access to the estate's east grounds had been restricted while a meeting was in progress. Restricted by whom? She said. Standing order, Cord said. He was polite about it. That almost made it worse. She found Damien in his office on the ground floor behind a desk that probably weighed 400 pounds. He was on a call, but he saw her face when she came in and ended it without explaining why. The East Grounds, she said. There's a security meeting. Your staff restricted my movement without informing me. That violates Clause 7 of the contract, which specifies that my freedom of movement within the property is not subject to standing orders from anyone but you, and any limitations require 24-hour advance notice except in the case of a documented immediate threat. He looked at her for a moment. You memorized the contract. I read it 4 times. I memorize what matters. Cord was following a protocol that predates your arrival. I'll have it corrected. Today, he said. No argument, no hedging. She turned to go, and he said, Elara. She stopped. I meant what I said in the car, he said. Every condition in that document. She turned back far enough to look at him. I was watching her with that same steady, unreadable attention, and she thought, not for the first time, that the most dangerous thing about Damien Cross was not his power. It was that sometimes, unexpectedly, he seemed to mean what he said. Then make sure your staff knows it, she said, and left. The Thursday meeting with the Renner group was held in Damien's conference room, a room off the main hall that was clean and deliberately minimal, designed to communicate that whoever sat across from Damien Cross was not at an advantage. 8 people at the table, 4 from Renner's side, 4 from Damien's. Elara sat to Damien's left, which put her directly in the line of sight of a man named Renner himself. Mid-50s, the kind of heavy that comes from years of money rather than muscle, with the look of someone who had expected to find a seat somewhere else. Renner didn't speak directly to Elara. He spoke through his associate, a younger man named Sayers who handled the negotiation points with practiced smoothness. But twice during the first half hour, Renner looked at her, not at her face, at her position at the table, and she watched the small shift in his calculation. She was being read. She read him back. Victor was at Damien's right. She watched him the way she'd been watching him for 2 days, in slivers, in the margins of other attention, in the micro-expressions that crossed his face when he thought no one was looking. Twice during the meeting, when Damien made it a point that closed off one of Renner's attempts to open a renegotiation door, she caught something on Victor's face that lasted less than a second. It wasn't pride in his employer. It wasn't satisfaction. It was impatience. After the meeting, Renner's group was escorted out by Cord. Victor gathered his papers and said something to Damien about the portside sign-off, and the two of them moved toward the door. Elara didn't move. She sat at the table and looked at the papers Renner's side had left. One sheet, a summary document, left deliberately. She picked it up. There was a handwritten note in the margin. Small. In pencil. She doesn't belong there. Get her out, or the Thursday arrangement is void. She set it back down. Her pulse was doing something she didn't like. She turned the sheet face down on the table and pressed her hand flat on top of it and breathed for 3 seconds. Someone had told Renner that her presence was a problem before the meeting even started. The note had been written in advance, pre-positioned. The only people who'd known she'd be at that table were Damien and Victor. She didn't tell Damien about the note. Not yet. She wasn't ready to show her hand, and she didn't know yet whether his reaction would be information or performance. Instead, she went back to her rooms and called Helen Park. I need you to look into Victor Hale's history with the Cross organization, she said. Not the public record, the timeline. When he joined, what his role was under Damien's father, and whether there was any documented conflict during the transfer of power. I can try, Helen said. That kind of history doesn't always leave paper. Find the paper that exists and tell me what shape the gaps are, Elara said. Sometimes what's missing is the whole story. A pause. Elara, are you safe? She thought about it honestly. I think so, for now. That's not a comforting answer. No, she said. It's not. Gregor called on Friday evening. She almost didn't pick up. Then she did, because she was angry at him, and she was also, underneath the anger, still someone who picked up when family called. Elara. His voice was rough. He'd been crying, or close to it. I'm so sorry. I need you to know. I know, she said. I should have told you sooner. I should have handled it myself. I should have… Gregor. She stopped him, not unkindly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Not the version where you protect yourself. The actual truth. A long silence. Okay. Who knew about your debts before you told me? Did anyone know what you owed and to whom before the debt got transferred to Cross? The silence this time was different, weighted. She felt it through the phone like a change in air pressure. There was a man, Gregor said slowly. About 4 months ago. He came to see me, said he was a financial consultant, that he could help me restructure. He knew the numbers exactly, all of them, from every lender. I don't know how. Elara gripped the phone tighter. What did he look like? Older, silver hair, very put together. He said his name was Hale, she said. Another silence. You know him, Gregor said. Yes, Elara said. I do. She stayed on the phone long enough to get the rest of it. Victor had visited Gregor twice, had asked questions about Elara, about her work, about her relationship to the family property. He'd been warm and curious in that specific way of his, and Gregor, who was desperate and had the judgment of a man drowning, had answered everything. She hung up and sat very still. Victor Hale had engineered all of it. He'd identified her, researched her, manufactured the debt crisis as a mechanism to get her into Damien's house, which meant Damien hadn't chosen her. Victor had. The question she still couldn't answer, the one that was starting to press at the back of her skull like a migraine, was why. What did Victor Hale want from having her here specifically? What did she represent to him? She pulled up her laptop and went back further into her research. Not into Victor directly. She'd combed that already. She went into her own family instead, into her parents, into the property history of the Voss estate and what might have been in it or attached to it that she didn't know about. She worked until 2 in the morning and found something just before she stopped. 11 years ago, her uncle Gregor had been deposed as a witness in a federal inquiry into organized crime in the Bellevere financial district. The inquiry had been sealed. The deposition summary, which was public record, indicated that Gregor had provided testimony related to financial transactions he'd witnessed in the course of his employment with a real estate firm called Dunmore Properties. Dunmore Properties had been dissolved the same year. Its primary backer, according to the last public filing before dissolution, was a holding company called Halvern Group. Halvern Group. Hale. Victor Hale. She stared at the screen. The connection wasn't direct. It was 3 steps removed, the kind of structure that's built specifically to survive scrutiny. But it was there. Her uncle had witnessed something, had testified, under seal, protected, about transactions that connected back to Victor Hale. And now, 11 years later, Victor had engineered a situation in which Gregor's niece was living inside Victor's employer's house, with full access to Damien Cross. She closed the laptop and put it in the locked drawer of the desk. She was not a bargaining chip. She was a tool. Victor had placed her here because he wanted something from Damien, or wanted something done to Damien, and he thought she was the instrument for it. Whether that made her valuable or made her dangerous depended on what Victor planned to do next. She spent the next 20 minutes sitting very still and thinking about her options. She found Damien in his office at 2:45 in the morning. The light was on. She knocked, and he said come in before she'd finished knocking, which told her he hadn't been asleep either. He was behind the desk. He looked at her, at the look on her face, and something sharpened in him without him moving at all. "What happened?" he said. It wasn't a question. She sat down across from him. She put the folded copy of the Renner note on his desk. She'd taken it after the meeting, kept it, and waited while he read it. His jaw moved, one small controlled motion. "Where did you get this?" Renner's side left it on the table. It was deliberate. Someone told him to put it there. Victor. Victor, she confirmed. And that's not the whole story. She told him about Gregor's call, about the visits 4 months ago, about Halvern Group and Dunmore Properties and the sealed deposition that connected her uncle to Victor's financial history. She laid it out the way she'd been trained to present structural analysis, clearly, sequentially, no editorializing, just the load-bearing facts. When she finished, Damien was very still. The stillness was different from his usual controlled composure. This was the stillness of a man who has just had something confirmed that he was hoping wasn't true. "How long have you known about Halvern?" she said. The pause before he answered was answer enough. "Since last year," he said. "I found a reference in my father's papers. I couldn't fully trace it. I had my people working on it." "Victor's been in your organization for 15 years. He came in under your father." "Yes." "Which means whatever Halvern is, whatever he was doing through it, he's been doing it for at least that long, potentially using your father's infrastructure, potentially using yours." Damien pushed back from the desk and stood up. He walked to the window that looked out over the dark east grounds and stood there with his back to her. She could see his reflection in the glass, the set of his jaw, the controlled tension in his shoulders. "He put you here," Damien said. His voice had dropped to something very quiet. "To do what exactly?" "I don't know yet, but I think he expected me to be passive. I think he expected to be able to manage me through you." That tells you something about what he's planning. He needs access to something inside this house, or he needs to control something you're about to decide, and he thought a compliant wife was an easier lever than direct approach. Damien turned from the window and looked at her. The space between them was 12 feet, and the tension of two people who have just had an alliance form in real time. "You're not compliant," he said. "No," she said. "I'm really not." He studied her. The muscle in his jaw was still tight, but something else was moving in his eyes, something complicated and direct. "I need to know if you're willing to stay in position," he said, "to let Victor think it's working, to give me time to build what I need to move against him." "Move against him how?" "Carefully. He has roots in this organization that go 3 layers deep. If I pull him out wrong, I pull the structure with him." She looked at him steadily. "And what do I get?" "Beyond the contract?" "Beyond the contract." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The truth. Everything I know about why your uncle's testimony was sealed, what Halvern Group actually is, and who gave the order to suppress the inquiry. All of it." She exhaled slowly through her nose. The room felt different than it had when she'd walked in. Smaller, more real. "You have to understand something," she said. If I play this out with you, I'm not your asset. I'm not a piece you move on a board. If you use me without telling me what you're doing, I walk, and I take everything I know about Halvern straight to the one journalist in this city Victor hasn't managed to get to yet." He didn't flinch. He didn't bargain. He simply looked at her for a long moment and said, "Understood. I want that in writing too. Name the terms." She named them. He agreed to 4 out of 5 and offered an alternative on the 5th that she considered and accepted. They sat across from each other in his office at 3 in the morning with a document they drafted on his legal pad and signed in ballpoint pen, and it was not a romantic scene by any definition. It was 2 people building a structure in the dark because the alternative was watching it come down on both their heads. When she stood to leave, he said her name again. She stopped. "The crack in the plasterwork," he said. "In your room, east corner, running towards center." She turned and looked at him. "I know about it," he said. "I've been meaning to have it repaired." "I wouldn't," she said. "You repair the surface and you miss what's underneath. You have to open the wall first." He held her gaze for a moment. There was something in it she couldn't catalog, the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet, something that sat in the space between wariness and something else entirely. "Go get some sleep," he said. She went, but sleep didn't come until almost 5, and when it did, it was shallow and full of the particular anxiety of someone who is committed to walking deeper into something that might not have a clear way out. At 6:47 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Helen Park. "I found the sealed deposition. Elara, your uncle didn't just witness transactions. He was asked to identify a person, a specific individual who was present at a meeting 11 years ago. The identity was redacted from the summary, but I found the original filing reference. The individual identified was a current member of the Cross organization." She sat up in bed. "I need a name," she typed back. Helen's response came in under a minute. The individual identified in the sealed testimony was Damien Cross. The phone sat in her hand. She looked at it. Outside, the estate grounds were coming into the gray early light, and somewhere on the other side of the wall, the man she'd just made an alliance with at 3 in the morning was either sleeping or not sleeping, and either way he had just become a different kind of problem entirely. She read the message 3 times, not because she didn't understand it, because understanding it the first time wasn't the same as accepting it, and her brain was doing the specific thing it did under shock, running the same information in a loop, looking for the exit that wasn't there. The individual identified in the sealed testimony was Damien Cross. She set the phone face down on the mattress. Then she picked it up again and typed, "How certain are you?" Helen's reply came in 40 seconds. "The filing reference is unambiguous." The original deposition used a case number, cross-referenced to a separate inquiry. I followed it back through 3 archived court filings. The name in the original document is Damien Cross, identified by your uncle as present at a meeting in which financial transfers connected to Halvern Group were executed. He was 23 at the time. 23. The year before his father died. The year before he took over. She got out of bed. Not because she had a plan. She didn't have a plan. She had the wreckage of a plan, and a very cold floor under her feet, and the specific physical nausea of someone who has just realized the architecture they were standing in is built on something other than what they were told. She stood at the window and looked at the east grounds in the gray, early light, and thought about the office at 3 in the morning. The legal pad, the ballpoint pen, the way he'd said understood when she told him she wasn't his asset, the way she'd believed him. She was angry. Not the hot, reactive kind, the cold, structural kind that settles into your joints and makes everything you do afterward more precise. She typed back to Helen, "Don't file anything, don't send anything anywhere. Keep this between us until I tell you otherwise." Then she put the phone in the locked drawer with the laptop and started getting dressed. She didn't go to him that morning. She needed time to think before she could look at him without the information showing on her face, and she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do in a structural crisis was start pulling at things before you understood which walls were load-bearing. She went to breakfast at the usual time, ate alone because Damien had a call, and spent the hour doing what she did with every problem that felt too large to hold whole. She broke it into pieces. Piece 1. Damien had been present at a meeting 11 years ago where Halvern Group financial transactions were executed. That made him connected to Victor's network at age 23. Piece 2. He had told her last night that he'd found a reference to Halvern Group in his father's papers last year and had been investigating it. That was either the truth or it was a performance designed to make her trust him. Piece 3. Victor Hale had engineered her presence in this house. If Damien was Victor's ally, if they were working together, then Victor had placed her here for a reason that served both of them, which meant she was being used not just by one man but by two, and the alliance she'd built at 3 in the morning was constructed on a lie. Piece 4. But if that were true, why had Damien given her the freedom to investigate? Why had he agreed to every term she'd named? Why put anything in writing at all? The pieces didn't fit into a single clean picture, which meant she was still missing something. She was still working through it when Victor appeared in the doorway of the breakfast room. "Mrs. Cross," he said, "I hoped I'd catch you. Do you have a moment?" His timing felt wrong. She didn't let that show. "Of course," she said. He sat down across from her, uninvited, comfortable about it, and poured himself coffee like he'd done it at this table 100 times. He probably had. "I wanted to apologize for the East Ground situation on Tuesday," he said. "The protocol was outdated. I should have caught it before it caused any inconvenience." "Damien handled it," she said. "He did." Victor smiled. The smile had the same calibrated warmth as always, and she had enough distance from it now to see the mechanism behind it. The way it engaged exactly the right muscles to register as genuine and no others. "He's very responsive to you. That's good. It's what we hoped for." "We." She heard it land. He'd said it deliberately, wanted her to hear it, wanted to see what she did with it. "Who's we?" she said. Victor looked at her over his coffee cup. "The people who thought a stabilizing presence would be good for Damien. He's been under extraordinary pressure since his father's death. The organization has too. Having a partner, someone grounded, intelligent, it helps." "That's a very considerate explanation for manufacturing a debt crisis and using my uncle as a lever." He didn't blink. "You're direct. I appreciate that." He set the cup down. "The method was inelegant. I understand if that bothers you, but the outcome is what matters, isn't it? You're here. He's different with you already. Anyone in this house can see it." "What do you want from me, Mr. Hale?" A pause. His eyes moved across her face with that scanning quality, reading for something specific. "I want you to help him make the right decisions," he said. "He respects your judgment. That gives you influence. Use it wisely." Wisely meaning in whatever direction you point. Wisely meaning in the direction that keeps everyone stable and intact. His voice had shifted slightly, not threatening exactly, more like a door closing at a measured pace. "There's a negotiation coming up in the next 30 days, a significant restructuring of several of Damien's arrangements with partner organizations. The decisions he makes will determine the trajectory of Cross Holdings for the next decade." She looked at him steadily. "And you want me to make sure he decides the way you want him to?" "I want you to make sure he decides carefully," Victor said. "He has a tendency toward impulse when he feels cornered. I think you can help him think more clearly." He stood, straightened his jacket, smiled the calibrated smile. "Think about what you want your role here to be," he said. You're an intelligent woman. There's a version of this where things go very well for you." He left. She sat with her coffee going cold and thought about the specific nature of what had just happened, which was that Victor Hale had just tried to recruit her without calling it recruitment, had threatened her without using a word that could be taken as a threat, and had assumed that she would respond to the offer of stability and position the way a woman placed here under duress might respond. He did not know her at all. She found the room on the third floor by accident, or by the specific kind of accident that happens when you're a person who pays attention to floor plans and notices that the square footage of the East Wing's third floor doesn't account for all the space the exterior dimensions suggest. There was a door behind a built-in bookcase in the upstairs library. Not hidden dramatically, just easy to overlook if you weren't the kind of person who counted walls. She was exactly the kind of person who counted walls. The room behind it was small, a study, old-fashioned, with a single desk and shelves of boxed files and a window that faced the interior courtyard. Dusty. Not recently used, but not empty. She didn't touch anything yet. She stood in the doorway and looked. On the desk, under a layer of dust that told her nobody had been in here in at least a year, was a leather portfolio with a monogram pressed into the corner. R.C. Richard Cross, Damien's father. She put on the cotton glove she kept in her jacket pocket, an architect's habit, handling old documents, and opened the portfolio. Inside were letters. Not typed, handwritten, on personal stationery. The top sheet was addressed to someone identified only as V, and the handwriting was the controlled, slanted script of a man who'd been educated to write neatly and had been doing it for decades. She read the first letter, then the second. By the fourth letter, her hands were completely steady, and her chest felt like someone had pressed two fingers against her sternum and was applying slow, increasing pressure. Richard Cross had not died of heart failure at 61, which was what the public record and the family had maintained. He had been building a case. For 2 years before his death, he had been documenting Victor Hale's parallel operation, the Halvern Network, the redirected funds, the dummy companies layered 3 and 4 deep. He had been collecting evidence that Victor was systematically siphoning money and resources from Cross Holdings to fund a separate power structure, one that would eventually be used to control the organization from outside it. The letters were addressed to V, but they weren't to Victor. She found the name in the fifth letter, in a passage where Richard abandoned his usual careful obliqueness and wrote with the direct exhaustion of a man who is running out of time. Damien doesn't know the full extent of it. I've protected him from it because knowing too early would have gotten him killed. By the time you read this, I will probably not be in a position to explain further. The evidence is where we agreed. Keep him safe. Don't let Victor get close enough to use him. V was a person Richard Cross had trusted to deliver this to Damien after his death, and the evidence had apparently never arrived. She stood in that dusty room with the fourth letter in her cotton-gloved hands and understood several things simultaneously. Richard Cross had been killed, not by heart failure. Victor had known he was being investigated and had moved first. Damien had grown up inside an organization that was partially controlled by the man who had murdered his father without knowing it. And the evidence his father had gathered, whatever it was, wherever it was the thing Victor had been searching for ever since. 11 years of patient positioning, of making himself indispensable to Damien, of building influence layer by layer, all of it pointing toward finding what Richard had hidden. Her uncle had been deposed in an inquiry that touched Halvern Group, which meant Gregor might know something about where the evidence was. Might have seen something, heard something, held something without knowing what it was. Which meant Victor had engineered her presence here not to influence Damien, to get to Gregor through her. She put the letters back exactly as she'd found them. She closed the portfolio. She left the room and pulled the bookcase back into position and stood in the library for 60 seconds, breathing. Then she went to find Damien. I was in the east corridor coming out of a meeting with 2 men she didn't recognize. He saw her face and said something brief to the men that made them leave, and he waited until they were out of earshot. "What?" he said. "I need to show you something. Right now, not here." He looked at her for a moment, that same reading load-bearing walls attention, and then he said, "My office, 2 minutes." She told him in the office, standing, because sitting felt wrong. She told him about the room, about the portfolio, about the letters. She told him everything she'd read, in the right order, watching his face. He stood very still through most of it. The stillness this time was not composure. It was something underneath composure. The particular stillness of a person whose ground has just shifted and who is standing extremely carefully on what remains. When she finished, he turned to the window. She watched his hands, both of them flat on the windowsill, pressing slightly. A man holding onto a surface because the room is moving. "My father's letters," he said. Not a question. "Yes." Addressed to someone he trusted. "Not you, not me." "No." "Who is V?" "I don't know. The letters don't say a full name." He was quiet for 30 seconds. Then, "Vera." Her name was Vera Lund. She was my father's legal counsel for 10 years. She died 8 months after he did. Car accident. His voice was completely flat. "I was told it was an accident." She watched him. The muscle in his jaw had gone rigid. His hands were still pressed flat on the sill. "Victor killed her," he said. It wasn't a question either. "I think so." "And my father?" "The evidence in those letters points that way." He turned from the window. His face was controlled, completely controlled in the way that takes active effort, the way that means the thing underneath it is very large. His eyes had gone dark, and she could see the thing moving behind them that he wasn't letting out. "You found this morning," he said. "Yes." "After Helen Park's message." She went still. He watched her go still, and she saw him register it. "What message?" he said. The question was precise. Too precise. She had not mentioned Helen's message. She had decided, after reading it, to find the room first, to have something concrete before she had that conversation. She had not told him about the message. He knew about it anyway. "How do you know about a message I received?" she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. He held her gaze. He didn't look away, didn't hedge, didn't recalibrate. He looked at her with that direct, exhausted honesty that kept catching her off guard. "Because I had Helen Park vetted before I approved her as your counsel," he said. "And when she filed a court records request at 6 this morning under a case number connected to a sealed federal inquiry, it flagged in a system my people monitor. You monitor sealed federal inquiry case numbers. I monitor anything connected to my organization's history." She breathed carefully. "Then you know what she found." "I know the case number. I don't know what's in the original filing. I was going to ask you about it this morning." "When?" "When I decided how." She looked at him. He looked back. The air between them was the kind of taut that happens right before something breaks or right before two people decide not to let it break. "Tell me what she found," he said. She told him. She watched the information land, watched him process his own name in a sealed federal deposition, a document that placed him at a Halvern Group meeting at age 23. She watched something move across his face that was not guilt and was not surprise, but was something older and more complicated. "I was there," he said. She said nothing. Waiting. "My father took me to a meeting. I was 23. I didn't understand what it was. I understood it was financial, understood there were people there I was being introduced to as the next generation. My father ran those introductions for 2 years before he died. I met dozens of people. I didn't know what Halvern was. I didn't know what I was signing off on." "Signing off on," she said. He looked at her directly. "There was a document. I was asked to countersign as a witness. I did. I didn't read it fully. I trusted my father. I was 23 and I trusted my father. And that document became evidence in a federal inquiry. Apparently. Victor Hale facilitated that meeting," she said. Not a question. "Yes." His voice had gone very quiet. "Victor arranged most of my father's introduction meetings, which means Victor put me in that room, which means if that deposition ever became fully public, I would be connected to a Halvern transaction regardless of what I knew or didn't know at the time." She understood now. Completely. Victor hadn't just been building power within Cross Holdings. He had been building leverage against Damien specifically, a document buried in a sealed inquiry that could be unsealed under the right conditions and used to expose Damien to federal scrutiny. Damien ran a criminal organization, but he'd survived this long in part because he kept his own hands clean of the specific kinds of transactions that invited federal attention. Victor had contaminated that protection 11 years ago without Damien knowing, then sat on it, a sword above his head. a leash Damien didn't know he was wearing, and Gregor, her uncle's sealed deposition, was part of the chain of custody for that evidence, which was why Victor had surfaced 4 months ago, warm and helpful, asking questions about Elara, about Gregor, about the family. Not to get to Damien through Elara, to find out what Gregor remembered, whether the old deposition could be activated, whether Gregor had documents, photographs, anything that could make the sealed case movable. And now Damien was looking at her across his office with that exhausted, direct gaze, and she was looking back at him, and the question between them, unspoken but enormous, was whether the man who'd been unwittingly compromised by his own trusted advisor for 11 years was the same man she'd shaken hands with at 3 in the morning. She decided to test it. "If I asked you right now," she said, "to let me call my uncle and find out exactly what he gave in that deposition, whether he has any documents, whether he knows where your father's evidence is hidden, what would you do with that information?" His answer came without hesitation. "Use it to dismantle Victor before he dismantles me." "And what about the deposition itself? Your name in it?" A beat, shorter than she expected. "If it becomes fully public, I deal with that. But I'm not going to let Victor hold it over me as a threat for another decade. Even if dealing with it exposes you." "I've been exposed to worse things than exposure," he said. She believed him. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to believe him, or if she had some structural blind spot that Victor had correctly identified and was counting on. She didn't know. What she knew was that she was already inside this, already past the point where caution meant staying still. "I need to go see Gregor," she said, "in person, not a phone call." "I'll arrange a driver. Alone," she said. "Just me." His jaw tightened. "That's not safe, I know. Victor doesn't know I've found the letters yet. He doesn't know what I know. If I go to my uncle's house with a full security detail, it announces that something has shifted. I need to go as if I'm just visiting. Alone." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see the calculation, the risk, the cost, the thing he'd have to override in himself to agree. "One person," he said, "non-visible, stays in the car." "Fine. You call me when you arrive and when you leave. If I don't hear from you within 10 minutes of expected arrival time, you'll hear from me," she said. She was halfway to the door when he said her name. She stopped, turned. He was still standing at his desk, one hand flat on the surface, watching her with something in his face that was not the controlled composure she'd cataloged over the last 4 days. Something more exposed than that. Something that she suspected didn't get let out very often. 11 years, he said. "I ran this organization for 8 years thinking I was navigating my father's world, building on what he'd built. Every decision I made, every alliance, every restructuring, I made it thinking I was working from a foundation he set." She waited. "It was his foundation," he said, "but Victor poured part of it, and I didn't know." "You know now," she said. He held her gaze. His jaw was tight and his eyes were dark, and he looked like a man who has just been handed a significant portion of his own history and is trying to figure out what it changes. "Go see your uncle," he said. She went. Odd. Gregor's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on the south side of Bellevere, the kind of building where the elevator worked maybe 70% of the time, and the hallways smelled like other people's cooking. She took the stairs. The driver, a quiet man named Petrov, who she'd chosen specifically because he hadn't tried to make conversation once in 3 days, stayed in the car. Gregor answered the door in a bathrobe and looked at her face and immediately stepped back to let her in. "You found something," he said. "I need you to tell me everything," she said. "The deposition, what you actually saw. Whether you kept anything from that time, documents, photographs, anything at all." He sat down heavily on the couch. He looked older than he had 4 days ago, which was saying something. "Elara, I know about Halvern Group," she said. "I know about Damien's father. I know Victor Hale came to see you 4 months ago, and I know why. I need you to fill in the pieces I'm missing." He was quiet for a moment. His hands were loose between his knees. Outside, traffic moved on the street below in the specific, indifferent way of a city that doesn't care what's happening in anyone's 4th-floor apartment. "I worked for Dunmore Properties for 3 years," he said. "I was a junior accounts manager. I moved money from file to file, processed transfers, filed reports. I was told it was all standard commercial real estate. Some of the transfers were large, but in commercial real estate, large is normal. But you saw something that wasn't normal. A meeting. I was asked to sit in as a note-taker. The regular assistant was sick. There were 6 men in the room. 2 I didn't know. One was a representative from Halvern Group. I knew that name from the files I processed. One was the director of Dunmore. And 2 were... He stopped. Keep going, she said. 2 were from Cross Holdings. One was older. I found out later it was Richard Cross. The other was young. Maybe 23, 24. He looked at her. I didn't know who he was until much later, until after the inquiry. Damien, she said. Yes. What was transferred in that meeting? Gregor's mouth worked. He rubbed his face with both hands and came out from behind them looking like a man who has been carrying something for 11 years and is about to set it down. Not money, he said. Documents. Evidence. Files that Richard Cross had been building about Halvern's operation. The same operation Halvern was running in parallel to Cross Holdings. Richard was handing them over. Not to Victor. To someone who was supposed to keep them safe outside the organization. She went very still. Richard Cross handed over his own evidence. To a woman named Vera Lund, Gregor said, his lawyer. She was there too. I left her out because she scared me and I wasn't sure she was relevant. She took the files. She left before the meeting ended. Vera Lund, the woman Damien had named, dead 8 months after Richard. Did she keep them? Elara said. Did Vera keep the files after Richard died? I don't know. After the inquiry, I was told to stop asking questions. I was given a settlement. I took it. He looked at her with the expression of a man who knows exactly what his cowardice cost. I took it, and I kept my mouth shut for 11 years. She stood up. Her mind was already moving 3 steps ahead, reconstructing the chain. Richard collected evidence, transferred it to Vera. Vera died before she could transfer it further. The files went somewhere. Somewhere they'd been sitting for 11 years while Victor searched for them and didn't find them. Gregor, she said. Did Vera Lund have family? He blinked. She had a sister, I think. Her phone went off. Not a call. An alert from the security app Damien's team had installed on her phone yesterday, at her request. Motion sensor, east grounds of the estate. She looked at the alert. Then she called Damien. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was completely flat and completely tight at the same time. Don't come back yet, he said. What's happening? Victor just walked out of the estate with 4 men I don't recognize. He didn't tell me he was meeting anyone here. My security flagged them when they left through the east gate. The letters, she said. If he found out, he doesn't know about the letters yet. This is something else. A pause. She heard him moving, heard a door close. There was a call this morning, before you came to see me. I had my tech team pull the logs. Victor received an encrypted call at 5:47 a.m. We couldn't decrypt it, but we traced the origin point. Where? A number registered to a shell company. His voice dropped slightly. A shell company that traces back to the Renner Group. Renner. The men from Thursday's meeting. The note left on the table. Victor is working with Renner, she said. Victor has apparently been working with Renner for at least 6 months, Damien said, and the Renner Group has significant connections to a consortium that has been trying to acquire controlling interest in Cross Holdings through proxy transactions for the last 2 years. She stood in her uncle's living room and understood the whole shape of it at once, the way you understand a building when you finally see the blueprint instead of just the walls. Victor wasn't trying to control Damien, he was trying to replace him. The parallel network, the leverage of the sealed deposition, the manipulation of the marriage arrangement, all of it was scaffolding for a transfer of power. Victor had been building toward taking Cross Holdings away from Damien and delivering it to Renner's consortium in exchange for whatever Victor had been promised: money, protection, a position in the new structure. And the transfer was apparently about to accelerate. How much time do we have? She said. I don't know, Damien said. Elara, the portside sign-off. Victor has been pushing me to sign it for 5 days. I haven't yet because something felt wrong. I just had my team pull the full documentation. What is it? A pause. Long enough that she felt it. It's a restructuring of our Eastern holding agreements, he said. If I sign it, 4 of my 7 primary partner organizations transfer their allegiance contracts to a new administrative entity, an entity that Victor controls. He's been waiting for your signature to trigger the transfer. Yes. And once it transfers, those 4 organizations report to Victor's entity, not to me. I lose majority control of the operational structure overnight. Don't sign it. I wasn't going to, he said. But here's the problem. His voice went quiet in a specific way. 2 hours ago, someone accessed the room on the 3rd floor. She stopped breathing. Someone other than you, he said. My security flagged an internal motion sensor at 8:43 a.m. You found the room later than that. Someone had been in that room before her. Someone had read the letters, or known they were there, and had moved before she did. Victor, she said, or someone working for him. Yes. Then he knows you know about Halvern. Possibly. Or he knows I'm about to know and he's accelerating. Another pause. Elara, the 4 men who left with Victor. I just got a description from the gate camera. She waited. One of them is a federal contractor, Damien said. A man named Bryce, who has worked private security for government-adjacent entities. The last time he was connected to a cross-related event was 11 years ago, the year of the sealed deposition. He's going to try to unseal it, she said. Victor is going to use the deposition to threaten you into signing portside. He's giving you a choice. Sign over the organization voluntarily, or face federal exposure over a meeting you attended when you were 23 and didn't understand. Yes, Damien said. How long before he makes the move? Based on the encrypted call and the timing of his departure, I think he makes contact today. Gives me until morning to decide. She looked at Gregor, who was watching her from the couch with the expression of a man slowly understanding that the fire he'd started had burned much further than he knew. I know where the evidence is, she said. Your father's files, the ones he gave to Vera Lund. I know how to find them. Silence. Elara, if we have your father's original documentation of what Victor built, all of it, the full Halvern record, Victor has nothing. The deposition becomes irrelevant because we can show your father was investigating Victor, that the meeting was part of that investigation, that you were present as a witness, not a participant. It changes the entire evidentiary frame. How long do you need? She thought about Vera Lund, about a sister, about 11 years of files sitting somewhere, waiting. Give me 4 hours, she said. I'll give you 3, he said. After 3 hours, Victor comes back and I have to respond to whatever he brings. I need you here. 3 hours, she said. She hung up and looked at Gregor. Vera Lund's sister, she said. I need a name, an address, anything. Right now. Gregor's face had gone the color of old ash. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then said something she didn't expect. Something that hit her like a support beam failing under load. Because the name he gave her wasn't a stranger's name at all. It was a name she already knew, connected to a piece of her own history she'd never thought to question. And in the 3 seconds it took her to put it together, the entire structure of what she thought she understood about how she'd ended up here collapsed completely and rebuilt itself into something far darker, far more personal, and far more dangerous than anything Victor Hale had constructed. The name Gregor gave her was Margaret Holt. She knew that name. She had known it for 6 years, in the specific way you know the name of the woman who handled your parents' estate after they died on a wet highway outside Bellevere. Margaret Holt had been the executor. She had been efficient and kind in a professional way and had walked Elara through every document, every account, every piece of remaining property with the careful patience of someone who understood that grief makes paperwork feel like cruelty. Elara had never asked how Margaret Holt came to be her parents' estate executor. It had been arranged before the accident. Her mother had mentioned it once. We've updated the documents. There's a woman named Margaret who'll handle things if something happens. And Elara had been 22 and had not wanted to think about something happening, so she hadn't. She stood in Gregor's living room and felt the floor shift under her in the specific way it does when a fact you've held as neutral suddenly becomes load-bearing. Margaret Holt, she said, Vera Lund's sister. Half-sister, Gregor said. Different father. I didn't know her well. I met her once, at a function, years before any of this. I only made the connection later, after the inquiry. She was my parents' estate executor. Gregor's face did something complicated. I know. Did you know at the time, when she was handling their estate? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Elara, did you know? I suspected. I wasn't certain. I didn't want to. He stopped. He looked at his hands. I didn't want to add anything to what you were already carrying. She breathed through it. The anger was there, but she put it behind a door for now because she didn't have time for it, and because Gregor's cowardice, whatever it had cost her, was not the crisis she was managing in the next 3 hours. Is she still in Bellevere? Last I knew. She retired from estate law 4 years ago. She has a house in the Crest neighborhood, north side, near the old reservoir. She was moving before he finished the sentence. Petrov drove without asking questions, which she appreciated. She called Damien from the car. "Margaret Holt," she said when he picked up. "I need everything you have on her in the next 20 minutes. Vera Lund's half-sister, estate lawyer, retired, Crest neighborhood." She heard him moving, heard him relay the name to someone in 2 clipped words. Then, "Talk to me." "She handled my parents' estate. I think Vera transferred the files to her before she died. I think Margaret has had them for 11 years and didn't know what to do with them, or who to trust with them." "Or she was waiting," Damien said. "For what?" "For someone to come asking the right questions." A pause. "Elara, my people just pulled Victor's location. He's not at a meeting. He's in the Crest neighborhood." She went cold from the chest out. "He's ahead of us," she said, "by maybe 30 minutes. He either had the same information you just got, or he's had it longer and has been waiting for a reason to move on it." "The encrypted call this morning," she said. "That was the trigger. Something changed. Something told him he needed to move today." "Us," Damien said. "I think the motion sensor in the 3rd-floor room wasn't Victor's people. I think it was mine. Someone on my security team who is also reporting to Victor. And when I pulled the portside documentation this morning and started asking questions, they reported it. He knows you're on to the transfer scheme." "Yes. Which means he's accelerating everything. He needs those files before I can use them." Petrov made a turn. The Crest neighborhood was 8 minutes out. "Damien," she said, "if Victor gets to Margaret first, he won't hurt her publicly. He'll talk her into handing them over, or he'll take them and walk. He's careful. He doesn't leave visible damage. He killed your father and made it look like heart failure." Silence. "He's careful," Damien repeated. His voice had gone to a register she hadn't heard from him before. Something below composure, something that had been sitting underneath it for 11 years and was now pressing upward. "Petrov knows how to handle a crowded situation. Tell him I said escalate to contact protocol." She relayed it. Petrov's eyes in the rearview mirror shifted. Not alarmed, just recalibrated. He reached under the dash with one hand. She chose not to look at what he took out. "I'm 7 minutes out," she said into the phone. "I'm 12 behind you," Damien said. "I'm in the car." "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to." She held the phone for a moment. Outside, Bellevere moved past. Ordinary streets, ordinary afternoon light, the city doing its indifferent city thing while the structure of something significant prepared to either hold or collapse. "Damien," she said, "still here. When this is over, the full truth about your father, you said you'd tell me everything. I will. Including the parts that are bad for you." A beat. "Including those." She put the phone in her jacket pocket and looked out the window and felt the particular quality of a moment just before something breaks open. The held breath quality. The awareness that the next several minutes would be the kind that don't get undone. Margaret Holt's house was a narrow 2-story with a blue door and window boxes that had been planted recently, the soil still dark. A silver sedan sat at the curb that Elara didn't recognize. Petrov pulled up 2 houses down and she was out of the car before it fully stopped. "Stay visible from the street," she told Petrov. "If anything moves wrong, you call Damien." She walked to the blue door and knocked. 40 seconds. She counted them. The door opened and Margaret Holt stood there. 70s, white-haired, smaller than Elara remembered, but with the same direct eyes, the kind that had been through enough not to be startled easily. She looked at Elara and something moved in her face. Not surprise. Recognition. The specific recognition of someone who has been expecting a particular knock for a long time and is not entirely sure whether its arrival is relief or catastrophe. "Elara Voss," Margaret said. "Margaret." She kept her voice level. "I need to come in." Margaret looked past her at the street. Her jaw tightened slightly. "You're not alone." "My driver. He'll stay outside." A beat. "Margaret, is there someone already inside?" The older woman's eyes came back to her, a silence that lasted 3 seconds and told Elara everything. "Come in," Margaret said. "What?" Victor Hale was standing in Margaret Holt's sitting room with his jacket buttoned and his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who is mildly inconvenienced by having been caught doing something he fully intended to do anyway. "Mrs. Cross," he said, you're faster than I expected." There was another man in the room, not one of the four from this morning, someone new, younger, standing near the doorway to the back hall with the particular stillness of someone whose job is to make sure no one uses that doorway. Margaret had moved to stand near the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, and she was watching Victor with the contained fury of someone who has been managing a dangerous situation for the last 20 minutes and is choosing her moments. "Sit down, Elara," Victor said, not unkind, like he was hosting. "I'm fine," she said. He studied her. The calibrated smile was absent. In its place was something more honest, which made him look older and considerably more dangerous. "I was just explaining to Margaret that this situation has grown more complicated than any of us anticipated, and that the best outcome for everyone requires a certain amount of cooperation." "You were telling her to hand over the files," Elara said. "I was suggesting that the files have been sitting in this house for 11 years serving no purpose except to put Margaret in a position of extraordinary legal jeopardy. Given that they contain evidence from a sealed federal inquiry, possession of them without disclosure is—" "Stop," she said it flatly. "You're not her lawyer. You're the man who had her sister killed. Don't explain her legal situation to her." Victor looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not guilt. Nothing as human as guilt. More like a man recalculating the weight of an obstacle he'd underestimated. "Where is Damien?" he said. "On his way." "Then we have a few minutes to be sensible." He took his hands out of his pockets. "Those files, in Damien's hands, become a weapon he'll use impulsively. He'll try to take me down with them without understanding the full scope of what he'd be pulling at. The Halvern network isn't just me, Elara. It's a structure. Pull the wrong piece and you bring down things that have nothing to do with Richard Cross or what happened 11 years ago. Or, she said, we pull the right piece and only you come down. You don't know which piece that is." "Not yet." He looked at her steadily. "What do you want? Tell me what you actually want, not what Damien wants. You." She held his gaze. "I want the truth about my parents." The room went quiet. Margaret made a small sound near the fireplace. Victor's expression shifted. A very small thing, almost imperceptible, but she'd been watching him for days and she caught it. The micro-expression of a man who has just had a card he was holding identified from across the table. "Your parents died in a car accident," he said. "Yes," she said. "They did. On a wet highway 6 years ago. A highway they'd driven 100 times. My mother was a careful driver. She didn't speed. She didn't take risks on wet roads. But there was a mechanical failure. The investigators called it brake failure, age-related deterioration of the hydraulic system. That happens. Their car was serviced 3 weeks before the accident. I have the records. Everything was checked. Everything was cleared." She watched him. "What I never thought to check was who serviced it. I trusted the garage my parents always used. I didn't think to ask whether the mechanic on that specific job was their regular person or someone new." Victor said nothing. "Gregor started asking questions," she said, "after the federal inquiry. He got close enough to the Halvern connection that someone got nervous. And my parents, my father specifically, had been asking their own questions. He was a journalist, retired but old habits. He'd been looking into Dunmore properties, into the financial irregularities that led to the inquiry." Her voice stayed completely level. She had rehearsed this without knowing she was rehearsing it, had been rehearsing it since the name Margaret Holt left Gregor's mouth, and the structure of the last 6 years rearranged itself around her. "You had my parents killed," she said, "because my father was close to connecting Halvern to Richard Cross's death, and because killing them sent Gregor a message to stop asking questions, which it did, for 11 years. Victor was quiet for a long moment. The man near the doorway had shifted slightly, very slightly, and Elara tracked it in her peripheral vision without moving her eyes from Victor. "I'm not going to confirm or deny. I know you're not," she said. "I don't need you to. I have Margaret." Victor looked at Margaret. Something cold and direct passed between them. "Tell him," Margaret said. Her voice was steadier than Elara expected. The voice of a woman who has been waiting to say something for 6 years and has the stillness that comes from a very long wait. She deserves to hear it from someone who actually knows. "Margaret," Victor started. "Vera told me," Margaret said to Elara, not to Victor. "Before she died. She'd been watching what happened to people who got close. She knew she was next. She called me and she told me everything, and she said the files were in the blue case under the floor panel in her office, and that I should keep them until someone came who could use them. Someone from inside who had enough power to move on it." Her eyes were wet, but her voice was not. "I'm sorry it took this long for that person to come." The man near the doorway moved, not toward Elara, toward Margaret. 2 steps, quick and purposeful, and Elara was already moving before she'd consciously decided to, crossing the room in 3 strides and putting herself between Margaret and the man with the specific body-blocking instinct of someone who has never thrown a punch in her life and is doing this entirely on forward momentum. She caught his forearm with both hands, not enough to stop him, she wasn't strong enough for that, but enough to interrupt his trajectory, enough to buy the 3 seconds it took for the front door to come open. Petrov moved fast for a large man. He had the younger man by the collar and the wall before anyone fully processed the transition, and the sound of impact was short and final, and the younger man did not get up. Victor didn't run. He stood in the center of the sitting room and looked at Elara with the expression of a man who has watched his last good option leave the table. "Where are the files?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was set. His eyes had the quality of something being decided. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "Margaret," Elara said, not looking away from Victor. "Where are they?" "Hall closet," Margaret said. "Blue case, top shelf." Damien arrived 9 minutes later. She heard the cars, more than one, and the front door opened, and he came in with 2 of his people and stopped in the doorway of the sitting room, taking in the tableau. Victor standing, Petrov near the wall, the younger man on the floor. Margaret seated now, her hands folded, composed in the way of someone who has discharged a long obligation and is allowing herself to breathe. Elara was on the couch with the blue case open on the coffee table and a stack of documents she'd been moving through systematically, and she didn't look up when Damien came in because she'd just found the document she was looking for, and she needed 30 more seconds. "Victor," Damien said. His voice was very quiet. "Damien." Victor's voice was equally quiet. 2 men in a room who had known each other for 15 years and were now seeing each other clearly for the first time. Elara found the page, set it on top of the pile, and looked up. "Sit down," she said to Damien. "Both of you." Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Damien sat on the arm of the chair near the fireplace. Victor remained standing. "The document on top of this stack," she said, "is a memo from Richard Cross to Victor Hale dated 14 months before Richard died. In it, Richard explicitly states that he has discovered Victor's parallel financial operation, that he has documented the full scope of the Halvern network, including its connections to the Renner Consortium's precursor entity, and that he intends to present the documentation to legal counsel with the intention of extricating himself from any contamination while protecting his son." She watched Victor. Richard also states in the second paragraph that he is aware Victor has been building leverage against Damien through strategic positioning at Halvern transactions, specifically the one where Damien was brought in as a witness at age 23 without being told the full nature of what he was signing. Damien was very still. The memo was copied to Vera Lund. It establishes that Richard knew, that Victor knew he knew, and that the subsequent death of Richard Cross from supposed heart failure was preceded by Richard documenting the threat Victor represented. She set the page down. It's not a smoking gun by itself, but it establishes motive, timeline, and the chain of knowledge. Combined with Gregor's sealed deposition and what Margaret can testify to regarding what Vera told her, it builds a case that a federal prosecutor who was not in Victor's pocket could work with. The room was very quiet. "You've been busy," Victor said. He was looking at her with something that was not quite admiration and not quite hatred. A more complicated thing, the look of a man who built something elaborate and is watching someone else disassemble it and is capable of appreciating the technical competence even as it destroys him. "Yes," she said. The Renner Consortium will not simply dissolve because I'm removed, he said. You understand that. They have other people, other levers. I understand that, she said. That's Damien's problem to manage. Yours is considerably more immediate. Victor looked at Damien. She watched the look, the specific communication between two men who have shared 15 years of institutional history, all of it now rearranged. Victor's expression was the closest she'd seen it come to unguarded, not remorse. Something more practical than that. The assessment of a man calculating his remaining options and finding them insufficient. What do you want? Victor said to Damien. Damien looked at him for a long moment. His face was controlled in a way that cost him, and she could see what it cost. I want to know if you killed my father, he said. The room held its breath. Victor was quiet for 5 seconds. Then, yes. The word was small and clean, and it landed in the room like something dropped from a building. Damien didn't move. He didn't speak. He sat on the arm of that chair, and something passed through his face that was very private, and she looked away from it because it wasn't hers to see. Then he stood up. He looked at the two men he'd come in with and said 2 words, and Victor was escorted out of Margaret Holt's sitting room in a way that was not violent but was also not optional. The front door closed. Elara began carefully restacking the documents in the blue case. Her hands were steady. She was mildly surprised by this. Damien stood across the coffee table and looked at her. She looked up at him. He looked like a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just put it down and is not sure yet what his hands are supposed to do without it. He said yes, Damien said. I heard. Just yes. Like it was... He stopped. I know, she said. He reached out and closed the lid of the blue case. His hand stayed there for a moment. Margaret, he said, looking across the room, I need to apologize to you, for all of it, for what happened to your sister, for how long this took. Margaret looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, the way someone looks when they're deciding whether a person is what they say they are or just what they need to be in a given moment. Vera thought your father was a good man who made bad choices in who he trusted, she said. She said you had the same face. She meant it as a compliment. Something moved in Damien's jaw. He nodded once. He picked up the blue case. He looked at Elara. We need to go, he said. Victor's people who are still at the estate. I need to move before they understand what's happened. She stood. She looked at Margaret. Will you testify when the time comes? I've been ready for 6 years, Margaret said. They moved toward the door. Damien was 2 steps ahead, already on his phone, already moving through the operational problems that were stacked up behind this moment. She followed him and then stopped at the doorway because something had been sitting at the back of her throat since the sitting room, and it needed to come out before she got back in that car. Damien. He stopped, turned. My parents, she said. Victor as good as confirmed it. I need you to know that's part of this for me. Whatever comes next, whatever you decide to do with those files and with Renner and with all of it, I need the full accounting, not just your father, mine too. He looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than most moments, with those dark eyes that she had spent 5 days reading and still hadn't fully mapped. You have my word, he said. Your word and another legal pad, she said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The first genuinely unguarded thing she'd seen on his face. Get in the car, he said. They were 4 minutes from the estate when the first call came in. One of Damien's people inside, voice tight, reporting that 3 of Victor's men had locked down the east wing and were not responding to instructions. 7 minutes out, a second call. The portside documents had been removed from Damien's office. Someone had anticipated the move and was trying to trigger the transfer without his signature by presenting a prior consent form that Victor had apparently been holding in reserve. Damien was on the phone continuously, directing, repositioning, his voice clipped and absolute. She sat beside him and listened and tracked the information and began mentally mapping the estate's layout, the approaches, the internal bottlenecks, the 3 points where a small number of people could control movement through the building. When they pulled through the gate, the estate was visually calm, which was its own kind of information. Damien's 2 most trusted people met them at the door. A woman named Carla, who ran internal operations, and a man named Seo, who handled security. Both had the look of people who had been making rapid decisions and were ready to receive new ones. East Wing is still locked, Carla said. 3 of Victor's people. They're not armed, that we can see. But they have the portside originals, and they've been on the phone with someone at the Renner Consortium's legal office trying to push through the consent form transfer. Which attorney? Damien said. Feldman. Pull Feldman's bar registration right now and have the cease and desist drafted in the next 15 minutes. If he processes that transfer on a fraudulent consent form, his license is the first thing that goes. He handed the blue case to Carla. Lock this in my office safe. Personal code, nobody else's. What about the 3 men in the East Wing? CO said. Damien looked at him. Give them one opportunity to stand down and come out. Voluntary. If they don't take it, they won't, CO said. Then handle it. CO moved. Carla moved with the case. Elara followed Damien through the main hall and into his office, where the portside file drawer was open and empty, and she watched him stand in front of it for exactly 3 seconds before he closed it. The consent form, she said. How was it structured? It would have required only the administrative entity's acceptance and a prior authorization from me. Victor had me sign a general operational authorization 14 months ago. I signed a lot of documents that month. There was a restructuring, and he apparently framed the portside consent as falling within the scope of that authorization. So he forged the link between the general authorization and the specific transfer. Yes, it's not airtight. A competent attorney tears it apart in an hour. But if Renner's Consortium can get it through their internal approval process before we get the cease and desist to Feldman, the transfer becomes a contested transaction rather than a void one. That's 6 months of legal fighting, and during those 6 months, the 4 partner organizations are in limbo. And in limbo, they become available to outside pressure. Exactly. From somewhere in the East Wing, she heard voices, elevated, short, and then a door, and then nothing. CO working. She didn't ask. She sat down across from Damien's desk and looked at him. He was standing, because he didn't sit when things were in motion. She'd noticed that. I was working his phone with one hand and had his other hand flat on the desk, and his jaw was set, and his eyes were moving through information she couldn't see. There's one more thing, she said. He looked up. Halvern files. The ones in the blue case. They document the network, the full structure. Victor, Renner's precursor, the financial channels. But they're 11 years old. The structure will have changed. Yes. Which means the files are powerful but not complete. We need someone who can fill the gaps, who knows where the network stands now, what it's become in the last decade. Victor, he said. You want me to use Victor? He confirmed your father. He's calculating. He knows what he's facing. If the offer is the right shape, you want me to deal with the man who killed my father? She held his gaze. I want you to decide what matters more, punishment or dismantlement. You can't have both. If you go at Victor with everything now, you get him. And Renner closes ranks and rebuilds, and you spend 5 years fighting the same war from a worse position. If you use him first, then I let him walk. I didn't say that. He looked at her steadily. Then what are you saying? I'm saying the order matters. Use him first. Get the current map of the network. Then whatever happens to Victor is a separate decision made from a stronger position. He was quiet for a long moment. The muscle in his jaw worked once. You're asking me to be strategic about this? Yes. When every instinct I have is telling me to end it right now? Yes, she said. He looked at her with something in his face that she was starting to be able to read. The specific expression of a man whose instinct and his judgment are in direct conflict and who is making himself choose the harder thing. I hate that you're right, he said. I know, she said. His phone went off. He looked at it. His expression shifted to something acute and rapid. The cease and desist didn't reach Feldman in time, he said. The consent form was submitted to 3 of the 4 partner organizations 8 minutes ago. She was on her feet. Which 3? Mercer, Blackwall, and... He stopped. Something crossed his face that was not panic. He didn't do panic, but was the closest thing to it she'd seen. And, she said, the 4th organization didn't receive the form, because the 4th organization's representative is already here. He arrived at the estate 14 minutes ago while we were coming in. He looked up from the phone. He came to see Damien Cross, he said. He was told to wait in the East reception room. Who is he? Elara said. Damien looked at her with eyes that had gone somewhere very dark and very controlled. His name is Aldrich Renner, he said. Marcus Renner's father. The man who built the consortium 20 years ago and supposedly retired 8 years ago. His jaw was tight. If Aldrich Renner is here in person, this is not a business transaction. He came here to watch. Watch what? To watch whether Damien Cross falls tonight or fights back. His voice had gone to that very quiet register again. And whatever I do in the next 30 minutes determines which consortium members follow Victor's play and which ones hold. She understood. The partner organizations weren't just administrative entities. They were people who had aligned with Cross Holdings because Damien Cross represented stability and power. If Renner's people could demonstrate that Victor had successfully outmaneuvered Damien, had transferred 3 organizations out from under him, had exposed him to federal leverage, had walked out of his own house, the 4th organization and anyone else watching would calculate that the wind had changed direction. Perception. In the world Damien operated in, perception was load-bearing. Then we go talk to Aldrich Renner, she said. He looked at her. We. You need someone in that room who isn't flinching, she said, and I haven't flinched yet. He held her gaze for a moment. The weight of it was different than it had been 5 days ago, different even than 3 hours ago. Something had accumulated between them in the space of a crisis that moved faster than either of them had planned for, and it sat in the air between them now as a fact rather than a question. Stay on my left, he said. Don't speak unless I signal you. What's the signal? I'll look at you like I trust you. She held his gaze. Can you do that? And Damien Cross looked at her with those dark, exhausted, complicated eyes and said, I already do, and turned toward the door before she could respond, and she followed him into the hall where the estate was either about to hold or about to come down. And she understood with complete clarity that whatever happened in the next 30 minutes would not be the end of anything, but rather the moment. Everything that had been built in 5 days of marriage, crisis, and documented conspiracy was finally asked to bear its full weight. Aldrich Renner was 73 years old and looked like a man who had spent every one of those years making decisions other people had to live with. He was seated in the East reception room when they came in, not standing, not pacing, seated with the specific stillness of someone who had never needed to perform readiness, because actual readiness didn't require performance. White-haired, broad through the shoulders, in the way of a man who had once been physically formidable and was now simply dense with age and authority. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes moved to Damien first, then to Elara, and stayed there for a moment with the assessing quality of someone recalculating a set of assumptions in real time. Damien did not sit. He stood in the center of the room and looked at Aldrich Renner the way you look at something you have decided to be honest about. You came alone, Damien said. I came with a driver, Aldrich said. His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it. I left him outside. I'm 73. I don't conduct business at gunpoint anymore. That's what the young men are for. Victor sent you. Victor told me I might find this evening instructive. A pause. Victor overestimates his own orchestration. I came because I wanted to see for myself. See what? Aldrich looked at him steadily. Whether you're your father's son or something better. The room held that for a moment. Elara stood to Damien's left and kept her face neutral and her eyes moving, between the two men, between Aldrich's hands and the door and the window and the small tells that a room gives you when you've learned to read them. My father is dead, Damien said. Victor killed him. I know, Aldrich said. The admission landed without ceremony. Just a fact, stated, the way old men sometimes state things they've been carrying for too long to pretend anymore. Damien's jaw tightened, one controlled motion. You knew. I suspected. For years. I didn't have proof, and I didn't ask for it, because the structure that Victor built after Richard died was profitable and stable, and I am not, whatever else I am, a sentimental man. He looked at Damien directly. I'm telling you this because you're going to find out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me than reconstruct it and decide the reconstruction is the whole story. It's part of the story, Elara said. Both men looked at her. She'd spoken without waiting for the signal, because the signal was a construct for a room that had already moved past it. You knew Victor was running a parallel network, she said to Aldrich. You knew he had leverage over Damien through the sealed deposition. And you let it develop because as long as Victor was building toward a transfer of cross-holdings, you had a path to consolidating control without a direct confrontation. Aldrich studied her. You're the niece. I'm his wife, she said. Answer the question. Something moved in the old man's face. Not amusement exactly, more the recognition of something he hadn't expected to encounter tonight. Yes, he said. That's accurate. Then you're as responsible for Richard Cross's death as Victor is, she said. Not legally, but in the way that matters. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands, then he looked back at Damien with something in his eyes that was the closest thing to accountability a man like that could probably produce. Yes, he said again. That's also accurate. Damien stood very still. She could feel the cost of his stillness from 3 feet away. The thing pressing upward against the control. The same thing that had been pressing all day, since Victor said yes in Margaret Holt's sitting room. Victor submitted the consent form to 3 of my partner organizations tonight, Damien said. Fraudulent authorization. The intent was to transfer administrative control. I know. I told him not to move yet. Aldrich's voice carried a flat irritation. He moved anyway. That tells you something about Victor's judgment in the last 48 hours. What changed his timeline? Elara said. You, Aldrich said, looking at her. Specifically, what you've been doing since you arrived in this house. Victor has a man inside the security rotation who reports to him. By yesterday afternoon, Victor's reports were telling him that his instrument was not behaving instrumentally. The old man's eyes were sharp and entirely without warmth, but they were honest, which she found she could work with. He thought you'd be manageable. A woman under economic duress, placed in a controlled environment, motivated to keep the peace. He didn't account for the possibility that you'd spend 5 days dismantling the walls. He should have read the contract more carefully, she said. I negotiated terms. People who negotiate terms under duress don't do it because they're passive. No, Aldrich said. They don't. He looked between them. What do you want from me? I didn't come here to be prosecuted in a sitting room. I came because the balance of this situation is not what Victor told me it would be, and I have enough experience to know when a structure is shifting. The consent forms, Damien said. You have influence with Mercer, Blackwall, and the third organization. You can pull them back. I can make calls, Aldrich said. Tonight. Tonight, Aldrich confirmed. In exchange for what? In exchange for not being included in what I do with the Halvern documentation, Damien said. Your name isn't in those files. You were careful about that. Very careful. Then stay out of my way while I dismantle what Victor built. Don't support Renner's Consortium's legal challenge to the consent form reversal. And when the time comes for the partner organizations to reaffirm their agreements, you don't work against me. Aldrich was quiet for 30 seconds, long enough that the room had weight. And Victor, he said. Victor is my problem, Damien said. Another pause. Aldrich looked at Elara one more time, a look that she understood was not about her but about what she represented in his calculation of what Damien Cross had become in the last 5 days. Make your calls, Damien said. Aldrich Renner took out his phone. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of Carla coordinating the legal reversal with Helen Park, working from her office on the other side of the city, of CO managing the 3 men from the East Wing who eventually stood down without escalation, of Damien on the phone with each of the 3 partner organizations' representatives, while Aldrich Renner made parallel calls that smoothed the path just enough. The fraudulent consent form was formally challenged by 11 p.m. By midnight, all 3 organizations had confirmed they were holding pending clarification. By 1 in the morning, the portside transfer had been suspended by the administrative entity's own counsel, who had apparently not been fully informed of the fraudulent authorization mechanism, and who, upon being informed, retreated from the transaction with the speed of a man who had just seen a very large liability materialize. Victor was held in a secured room on the estate's ground floor through all of it. Damien did not go to see him until after 1 a.m., and he went alone. Elara didn't ask what was said. She sat in Damien's office with the blue case open on the desk and continued working through Richard Cross's files, cross-referencing dates and names against the structural map she'd been building in her head since Margaret Holt's sitting room. When Damien came back, He looked like a man who had walked through something and come out the other side of it changed in a way that hadn't fully registered yet. He sat down, not on the arm of the chair this time. In it, fully, with the weight of someone who has temporarily run out of the energy that posture requires. "Well," she said. "He'll cooperate," Damien said. "Full testimony. The current structure of the Halvern network, the Renner Consortium's financial channels, the names of the people who carried out the operations he ordered, including," he stopped for a moment, "including the people involved in my father's death. And in your parents." She set down the document she was holding. She did it carefully, without rushing. "He confirmed it," she said. "My parents." "Yes." His voice was very quiet. "A man named Croft. He's been out of the country for 4 years. Victor gave me the location." She sat with that. The room was very still. Outside, the estate had gone quiet. Whatever operational noise the evening had produced had settled, and there was just the house and the dark and the faint sound of the grounds in the late October wind. She had thought, in the abstract, about what it would feel like to have this confirmed. She had been so focused on the mechanics of getting there, the files, the timeline, the network structure, the legal reversal, that the emotional fact of it had been held at arm's length all day by necessity. Now there was no necessity keeping it there. Her parents had been killed by a man named Croft, on Victor Hale's instruction, because her father had been asking questions that were getting too close to the truth, and because Gregor needed to be silenced, and because neither of them had mattered enough to the people doing the calculating to factor in that they had a daughter who was 22 years old and working her first job and eating dinner alone in a studio apartment when the call came. She looked at the window across the room. The glass was dark. "Elara," Damien said. She looked at him. His eyes were on her with the specific attention of someone who is not trying to fix anything, just watching, just being present to the weight of something. "I know it doesn't," he started. "Don't tell me it doesn't fix it," she said. Not sharp, just tired. "I know it doesn't fix it. I never thought it would." She exhaled slowly. "It's just different, knowing. That's all. It's different from not knowing." He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and she looked back at him. And the thing that had been accumulating between them all day, all 5 days, sat in the room as something real and heavy, and neither of them tried to name it or manage it. "The files go to Helen tomorrow," she said finally. "We structure the legal submission carefully. Your father's memo, the chain of custody through Vera and Margaret, the current network map from Victor's testimony. We build it properly." "Yes." "And Croft." "I'll handle Croft," he said. The way he said it left no ambiguity, and she didn't ask for any. She nodded once. She started restacking the files. 2 weeks later, Victor Hale's cooperation agreement was formalized through a legal structure that kept his name out of the initial filings while his testimony was verified and cross-referenced. The federal inquiry into Halvern Group's operations, the same inquiry that had been sealed 11 years ago, was quietly reopened by a prosecutor named Avery Strand, who had been working organized crime cases in Bellevere for 12 years and who, upon receiving the new documentation package through Helen Park's office, reportedly spent 2 consecutive days in her office without going home. Marcus Renner publicly disavowed his father's consortium activities within the week. Aldrich Renner made no public statement. He withdrew from his remaining organizational connections and was not heard from in any context that touched Damien's operations again. The 3 partner organizations reaffirmed their agreements with Cross Holdings by the end of the month. The 4th, the one Aldrich had personally influenced, took 3 weeks longer, but it came. Elara went back to her firm. She worked remotely, then partly from the estate, then from a converted room on the ground floor that had better light than anywhere in the East Wing, and which she had quietly reorganized over 3 days with Damien's permission and the staff's startled assistance. Her name appeared on 2 project proposals submitted in November, both of them accepted. She started sleeping properly again somewhere around the 3rd week of the month, which she noted as a data point and tried not to attach too much significance to. Gregor came to dinner at the estate on a Thursday in late November. He arrived with a bottle of wine he couldn't afford, and the expression of a man preparing to be forgiven for something he wasn't sure he deserved to be forgiven for. Elara met him at the door herself. He looked at her face for a moment, really looked, the way you look at someone you've known their whole life and are trying to see clearly through the weight of history. You look different, he said. I've been working, she said, but that's not what I mean. She knew what he meant. She didn't answer it, just stepped back to let him in, the way she'd once stepped back to let Damien cross into the house she'd been raised in. The gesture felt different now, less like retreat, more like a choice. Dinner was not comfortable in the way that easy dinners are comfortable. It was the other kind. The kind where the people at the table are working through something real and the food is secondary and everyone knows it. Gregor apologized 3 times in various forms. Damien absorbed all 3 without deflecting them or accepting them too easily, which Elara thought was the right response, and which she suspected had cost him something to produce. At some point over dessert that no one was really eating, Gregor said to Damien, "She used to take buildings apart when she was a kid, like structurally. She'd look at a picture of a house and tell you everything that was wrong with it." Damien looked at her. "I know," he said. Gregor looked between them. Something settled in him, some specific worry that she hadn't known he was carrying. He picked up his wine and said nothing else about it. The conversation she had been waiting for happened on a Sunday in December, which was a month and 9 days after Victor Hale had been escorted out of Margaret Holt's sitting room. She found Damien on the grounds in the early morning, not the east side, the north side, where there was a low stone wall and a view of the fields that in better weather were probably something. In December they were gray and flat and honest. He was standing at the wall with his hands in his coat pockets, and he didn't turn when she came up beside him, which meant he'd heard her coming and had decided not to perform the surprise. She stood beside him. The cold was specific and clean. She could see her breath. "The 12 months, she said. "Yes," he said. "The contract. The original condition, a year, minimum, after which they discuss." They were not at 12 months yet. They were at 6 weeks. But the discussion had a gravity to it that wasn't going to wait for an arbitrary calendar date, and they both knew that. "What do you want to do?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the controlled, calculating quiet, the other kind. The kind that means a person is being honest with themselves before they speak. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because of the contract, not because of the inheritance clause, which has been satisfied, which you should know." He looked at her. "I want you to stay because this house is different with you in it, and I'm different with you in it, and I don't think I was aware of how much I'd stopped expecting that until it happened." She looked out at the gray fields. The cold moved across the back of her neck. "I came here under duress," she said. "I know." "Manufactured duress. Someone engineered it." "I know that too." "And you let it happen because your timeline was convenient." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. A bird moved somewhere in the tree line to the north, a dark shape against a pale sky, there and then gone. "I want you to understand something," she said. "I'm not staying because I owe you something. I'm not staying because I'm grateful for how the contract was structured, or because the last 6 weeks were survivable, or because you kept your word about the terms. Those things matter, but they're not the reason." He was watching her now. She could feel it without looking. "Then what is?" he said. She turned to look at him directly, the way she'd been looking at structures her whole professional life. Not for what they presented, but for what they actually were underneath. "Because when I found those letters," she said, "and when I figured out what it meant, and when I came to your office at 3 in the morning with information that could have gone 100 different ways, you didn't manage me. You didn't calculate whether to tell me the truth about the deposition. You just told me. And in my experience, people don't do that when they're performing. They do that when they're too tired to be anything other than what they are." He was very still. "You're not a good man by any conventional accounting," she said. "I'm not pretending otherwise. What you run, what you've built, the methods behind it, I'm not putting a clean face on any of that. I know. But you're an honest one," she said, "in the specific way that matters. And I didn't expect that. And I'm not willing to walk away from something I didn't expect just because the circumstances that produced it were ugly." The wind moved between them. He breathed, "Che." She saw it. The breath that comes out when something held for a long time is finally released. "The organization," he said. "I meant what I said in the office. The corrupt channels, Victor's infrastructure, the parts of the network that have been running parallel operations. I'm dismantling them. Not because of the legal exposure, because they're built on what he built, and I'm not running what he built. That's going to cost you. Yes. Some of those channels are profitable. Yes. And some of the people attached to them are going to push back. I expect so. She looked at him. You've already started. The corner of his mouth moved. The ghost of the almost smile she'd been cataloging since the first time she'd seen it. Carla is very efficient when she has clear instructions. What do you need from me? He looked at her for a moment, a look that was direct and uncalculated and carried the weight of a man who has spent most of his adult life not asking for things from people because asking required a degree of vulnerability that his world punished. What you've been doing, he said, finding the cracks, telling me what you see. I'm an architectural designer, she said, not an advisor. You're both, he said, whether you took the title or not. She held his gaze. Something settled between them. Not resolution exactly, more like two structures that have been under load finding their mutual bearing point. The thing that had been accumulating for 6 weeks was not the clean, uncomplicated thing that stories sometimes made of it. It was built from crisis and duress and information that arrived in the wrong order and choices made under conditions that hadn't been fair to either of them. But it was real. She'd tested enough structures to know the difference between something that holds and something that merely looks like it does. I'll stay, she said. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked out at the gray fields and his jaw was set and his hands were still in his coat pockets, and she could see, in the line of his profile, something that had been braced for a long time very quietly ease. The crack in the plasterwork, he said. In your room. I had someone look at it properly. And? You were right. The surface repair would have missed the underlying settlement. They have to open the wall. He paused. It's going to take 3 weeks and the room will be unusable. She looked at him. He was still looking at the fields, but the corner of his mouth had moved again. Less a ghost this time, more the real thing. Small, controlled, entirely genuine. I have another room, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The cold sat around them and the bird was gone from the tree line, and the fields were exactly as gray and honest as they'd been when she arrived. 3 weeks, she said. At least, he said. I'll want it done properly. I know you will. She looked out at the fields. She breathed in the cold December air and thought about load-bearing structures and the specific patience required to repair something correctly, to resist the shortcut of the surface fix, to open the wall and look at what's actually there and deal with it directly and rebuild from the real foundation, rather than the one you wished you had. All right, she said. The formal legal proceedings against Victor Hale began in January. They were slow and complicated and expensive in the way that all things are slow and complicated and expensive when they involve dismantling something that was built to resist dismantlement. Prosecutor Avery Strand was methodical and ruthless in the specific way of someone who has been waiting for the right case and is not going to rush it. Victor's cooperation was real, but was also measured. He gave what he had to give and held back where he calculated he could. And the negotiations over what he'd held back were a separate ongoing process that ran parallel to everything else for months. Margaret Holt testified in a closed session in February. Elara sat with her the morning before, and they drank coffee in Margaret's kitchen and didn't talk about the testimony itself. They talked about Vera, about what Vera had been like as a young woman, about a trip to the coast they'd taken together in their 30s that had gone wrong in several minor ways and had been funny afterward. Margaret cried once, briefly, and wiped her face with the same no-nonsense motion she applied to everything, and said, "She would have liked you." Elara thought about that on the drive back to the estate. She thought about the version of events in which she never ended up in that sitting room, in which Victor's scheme had fallen apart at some earlier stage, in which Gregor had found another way, in which the particular chain of choices and crises that had delivered her to this life had gone differently. She couldn't fully imagine it. Not because she couldn't picture the absence of what she had, but because the people she'd lost were still lost in that version too, and the truth about how they died was still buried, and that felt like the larger subtraction. She didn't believe in clean versions of history. She dealt in what was actually there. Gregor sold the Voss estate in March. He came to her before he listed it, which she appreciated. She went back once to walk through it alone, not for sentiment exactly, more for the specific architectural habit of seeing a structure clearly before you let it go. She stood in the kitchen where she'd eaten the sandwich she never finished on the night Damien's cars pulled up, and she stood in the living room where the fire had crackled and the rain had hit the windows, and she'd told a man she would hear his proposal, and she stood in the foyer where none of it had looked like what it turned out to be. She found the hairline crack in the plaster in the living room she'd never noticed before. Running from the west corner toward the center, decades of settling, she pressed 2 fingers lightly against it. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. Everything real was. She left and didn't go back. The room in the estate was finished in April. They'd opened the wall and found, as she'd predicted, a section of compromised internal structure that a surface repair would have hidden for another decade before it became a real problem. The rebuild took longer than 3 weeks. It took 7. But it was done correctly, and when it was done, the room was sounder than it had been in 30 years, and the plasterwork was clean and uncracked, and she ran her hand across it the morning after the last crew left, solid in the way that only correctly repaired things are solid. She moved her things back from the other room in the East Wing on a Tuesday evening. Not a production, just the ordinary act of returning to a space that was hers. Damien leaned in the doorway at some point and watched her rearrange the desk the way she wanted it, which was not the way it had been before. "Better?" he said. She looked around the room, at the window and its view of the east grounds and the fields beyond, at the desk in the position that made sense for the light, at the plasterwork that was whole and clean and had been properly dealt with from the inside out. "Yes," she said. He stayed in the doorway. He was watching her with those dark eyes that she had spent months learning and was still learning, and there was something in them that was not the controlled assessment of the first night or the exhausted honesty of the office at 3 in the morning, but something that had grown from both of those things and become its own distinct quality. Something quieter and more settled. The look of a man who has stopped bracing for the loss of something because he has decided, against his historical judgment, to trust that it might stay. She looked back at him. There was no clean ending to what they were. No moment where the difficulty of the origin dissolved into something simple or the cost of the months preceding it was retroactively reduced. They were 2 people who had come together under conditions that neither of them had controlled, who had fought their way through something real and ugly together, and who had found on the other side of it that the thing between them was not a transaction and not a temporary arrangement and not the negotiated minimum of a legal contract. It was what it was, built from the actual materials at hand. She crossed the room and stood in front of him and looked at his face, the jaw and the dark eyes and the specific set of his mouth that she had been cataloging since the first night and could now read without effort. "Come in or go away," she said. "You're letting the cold in." He came in. He let the door close behind him, and the room was quiet and sound, and the plasterwork held. Outside, Bellevere moved on in its ordinary, indifferent way. The city that didn't care about anyone's 4th-floor apartment, or any sitting room, or any rain-soaked driveway on any October night. The city that would keep producing exactly the conditions it always had and leave the people inside it to make what they could of them. They had made something. It wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. It hadn't been free, but it was theirs, and it held. And for 2 people who had each spent a long time standing in structures that were quietly failing from the inside, that was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything.